German panzer crews entered the Soviet Union in June 1941 confident in their superiority. They expected the poorly armed Soviet tanks to pose little resistance. Reality contradicted these beliefs at Mtsensk in October. In a single engagement, German commanders witnessed 10 T-34 medium tanks halt the advance of over 100 panzers from the 4th Panzer Division. Designed with 45 mm sloped armor and a 76.2 mm gun, the T-34 simply absorbed direct hits from German 37 mm and short 75 mm guns at standard ranges. Units that reported easy victories days before now sent urgent warnings. The number of lost vehicles and disabled guns in these encounters outpaced previous records for the division. Direct fire at distances under 500 meters repeatedly failed to penetrate Soviet armor, shocking experienced German gunners. Observations from the battlefield revealed that Soviet tanks maintained mobility even when hit, while Panzer III and IV models stalled or burned after similar strikes. The previously underestimated Red Army not only fielded a modern machine, but one specifically resistant to German tactics and hardware. This unanticipated advantage became clear within hours, forcing immediate reevaluation at all command levels. The facts were unmistakable. The T-34 was a technical and tactical surprise that the Wehrmacht had not prepared to counter. Documentation and after-action reports would later confirm the extent of German losses and the urgent calls for new armament. The sudden shift in battlefield dynamics would have lasting consequences for armored warfare on the Eastern Front. October 6, 1941, 05:30 hours. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian ordered the WWII Panzer Corps to resume the advance east along the Bryansk-Orel highway near the village of Mtsensk, 25 kilometers northeast of Orel, on open but muddy terrain. Guderian's objective was to encircle Soviet forces and capture Tula. His force at this sector included the 4th Panzer Division with 173 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, supported by 2 motorized infantry regiments and elements of the 88th Artillery Regiment, totaling over 6,500 personnel. Facing them, Colonel Mikhail Kadukov commanded the newly formed 4th Tank Brigade, fielding 10 T-34 medium tanks, 12 KV-1 heavy tanks, and approximately 400 infantry at defensive positions near Mtsensk's railway embankments and forested edges. The Soviet brigade was supported by 2 76.2 mm divisional guns and a complement of PTRD-41 anti-tank rifles. Kadukov's deployment aimed to create overlapping fields of fire covering all approach routes. German staff anticipated minimal resistance. Past engagements with the BT-7 and T-26 light tanks cemented a belief that Soviet armored units would crumble after the initial barrage. Intelligence from intercepted Red Army signals on October 3 indicated poor coordination among Soviet tank battalions. The technical superiority of the Panzer III's 37 mm KWK 38L45 gun and Panzer IV's short-barreled 75 mm KWK 37 was assumed sufficient for rapid breakthroughs against enemy armor. However, heavy rainfall had transformed dirt roads into mud, reducing maximum movement speed to 8 km/h for tracked vehicles. Forested areas bordering the highway limited maneuver options for motorized columns. Luftwaffe aerial reconnaissance at 500 failed to identify camouflaged T-34s dug into hull-down positions within tree lines. Early morning fog cut visibility to less than 400 meters. What happened in the next 90 minutes would determine whether Guderian's drive toward Moscow stalled or advanced further into Soviet territory. At 05:50 hours, the lead company of the 35th Panzer Regiment, part of the 4th Panzer Division, and commanded by Hauptmann Friedrich Hein, advanced toward the village outskirts. Each Panzer III was outfitted with a 37mm KWK-38 gun and 30mm frontal armor, carrying crews of 5 with an average weight of 23 tons per vehicle. Infantry riding in Est. KFZ. 251 half-tracks followed along the main dirt road, which was 6 meters wide and heavily rutted from recent rainfall. On the Soviet side, Colonel Mikhail Kadukov positioned 10 T-34 tanks with 45mm sloped armor and 76.2mm F-34 main guns, supported by 2 KV-1s equipped with 75mm armor plates at 16-degree slopes. Tank crews had access to 100 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition per vehicle. The T-34s established camouflaged firing positions 400 meters from the advancing German column. German reconnaissance elements encountered anti-tank obstacles using Model 1940 steel hedgehogs, which delayed progress by nearly 12 minutes. By 0610 hours, German artillery reported 7 vehicles disabled by direct hits from T-34s, with 300 meters advanced before stalling. Artillery observer Lieutenant Walter Kremer, positioned on a nearby ridge, relayed that standard AP rounds ricocheted off Soviet armor at ranges under 400 meters. Meanwhile, at battalion headquarters, Signals Officer Oberleutnant Hans Eismann intercepted a Soviet radio transmission. The Red Army would counterattack after disrupting the lead German units. With fog at 8 degrees Celsius and visibility stuck at 350 meters, return fire accuracy dropped by 25%. At 0620 hours, a Panzer IV fired at 300 meters. Its shell failed to penetrate a T-34. Guderian ordered the division to regroup. By 0635 hours, 13 panzers were disabled and 2 T-34s damaged. But at 0640 hours, coordinated Soviet maneuver began along the embankment of development that would now dominate the battle's next phase. At 0642 hours, Oberleutnant Hans Eismann, signals officer at the 35th Panzer Regiment's field command post, registered an abrupt cessation of radio check-ins from 3 forward panzer platoons. Operating a Lawrence Fu G5 transceiver, Eismann noted that only 4 out of 11 vehicles reported after the latest maneuver along the embankment. Simultaneously, Hauptmann Friedrich Hein at the lead observed 2 T-34s advancing, while sustaining multiple direct hits from both 37mm and 75mm shells, which left armor plating dented but unbreached. After firing 10 rounds each, German crews confirmed 0 penetrations against T-34 frontal armor data recorded in the unit's after-action log. 85 words. Technically, this discovery spelled tactical disaster. German standard armor-piercing rounds model PZGR. 39 for 37mm and 75mm guns were designed to penetrate up to 39mm and 43mm respectively at 400 meters. The T-34, S-45mm sloped armor, angled at 60 degrees, raised effective resistance to nearly 90mm, a figure nearly double what German gunners expected. Eismann relayed this to 4th Panzer Division headquarters at 644 via encrypted telegraphy. Regimental command was notified in less than 3 minutes. 80 words on the Allied side. Colonel Mikhail Kadukov's 4th Tank Brigade recognized a rare opportunity. Lieutenant Fyodor Mishin, commanding the forward Soviet platoon, detected no significant losses or penetrations after 20 minutes of fire exchange. Soviet spotters observed German advance elements bunching on the muddy road, within an overlapping field of fire. Kadukov ordered a coordinated counterattack with all 10 T-34s and supporting KV-1s. 90 Red Army infantry advanced 150 meters under covering fire, and 2 divisional 76.2mm guns began targeting immobilized panzers. 85 words within the German 35th Panzer Regiment. Confusion intensified. Hauptmann Hein, realizing the futility of current munitions, ordered crews to attempt flank shots at under 200 meters. However, T-34s used speed and mobility to deflect maneuvers, exploiting tree lines for concealment. Panzer III and IV commanders reported jamming radio signals and inaccurate returns. By 0649 hours, company links to battalion headquarters had failed for 8 out of 11 vehicles in the forward echelon. Reports filtered back of immobilized tanks and panicked crews abandoning vehicles. 80 words by 0652 hours, the Discovery's impact spread rapidly. Both I and II Battalion of the 4th Panzer Division lost radio communication with 21 tanks across the embankment and southern woods. The German right flank, comprising 14 vehicles under Oberstleutnant Hans von Oppelm-Bronikowski, reported complete loss of forward observation. Soviet armor advanced over 300 meters unopposed. The tactical reality was plain. Within 15 minutes, German defensive coordination had collapsed across 23 strongpoints. 70 words the Panzer III Est, KFZ, 141 and Panzer IV Est, KFZ, 161 were engineered to function reliably at ranges up to 1,200 meters against armor plating up to 40 millimeters. The most common Panzer III model at Mtsensk used the 37 mm KWK 38L45 gun, while the Panzer IV fielded the 75 mm KWK 37L24 short-barreled gun, each firing PZGR 39 armor-piercing shells with an average muzzle velocity of 690 meters s and 385 meters s respectively. However, the T-34 sloped 45 mm frontal armor, angled at 60 degrees, provided increased shot deflection and practical thickness of up to 90 millimeters. Field tests at Kummersdorf in early 1941 had not included combat against sloped medium armor at acute angles or at muddy, low-visibility conditions, leaving German gunners unprepared for the T-34's capabilities. Additional challenges included frequent radio failures in Fu-5 units, unreliable AP shell performance, 17% dud rate, and delays in target acquisition under foggy conditions. 120 words. Strategically, the directive to initiate a rapid daylight advance was issued by Generaloberst Heinz Guderian at 0500 hours on October 6, based on a Boyer Intelligence Summary 1441, issued October 4, which described only light Soviet armor present in the sector. This estimate overlooked the recent transfer of the 4th Tank Brigade's T-34s, whose presence was confirmed only after engagement began. Compared to the 1940 French campaign at Arras, where German panzers faced Matilda IIs with similar surprise but could call Luftwaffe support in clear weather, at Mtsensk, poor visibility nullified air supremacy and forced reliance on underpowered tank guns. The Operations Manual HDV 300/10 called for armored spearheads to maintain 2-kilometer spacing, but the muddy roads and defensive obstacles created congestion and forced deviation from doctrine. 120 words, captured 35th Panzer Regiment logs, translated by Soviet military intelligence, documented over 13 urgent requests for 50 mm or 75 mm long-barreled upgrades in the hours after the Mtsensk action. Guderian's own 7 October diary entry lamented, "Our best guns cannot defeat the sloped Russian armor." Post-war interrogation of Hauptmann Hein noted, "We were tactically blind and physically outgunned." Soviet intelligence files, TS Ammo RF, FON 233, OPIS 2389 described 31 immobilized German tanks by 700. At Mtsensk, the German penetration rate against Soviet armor was under 9%, compared to 44% against French Char B-1 tanks in May 1940. This 35% decrease explains the dramatic German tactical failure. Soviet after-action reports credited 14 T-34 crew members for exemplary performance in the defense. 110 words. The 35th Panzer Regiment under Hauptmann Friedrich Hein immediately ordered a tactical withdrawal at 0700 hours. Within 18 minutes, the number of operational German tanks on the embankment dropped from 37 to 14. 47 personnel from the forward companies were confirmed killed or missing due to direct exposure to Soviet armor-piercing fire and subsequent crew abandonments. This enabled Soviet forces to mount a close-quarters counterattack, overrunning the German forward observation posts, a move not previously possible in direct tank duels. The 4th Panzer Division redirected three 8.8 centimeters flak batteries from anti-aircraft coverage to supplement anti-tank defense at the southern approaches. 100 words. Generaloberst Guderian at the WWII Panzer Corps Advance Command Post received this intelligence at 0712 hours. He ordered an immediate halt to the eastward advance, consolidating forces in a 2-kilometer arc northwest of Mtsensk and redeploying support units to cover the southern railway. The revised plan called for a phased, artillery-supported flanking maneuver rather than the original frontal assault. This required reallocation of all available 105 mm guns and the use of smoke shells to shield infantry crossings, reducing offensive tempo by 50%. Oberstleutnant von Oppelm-Bronikowski concentrated remaining tanks for perimeter defense. He cited, visibility, armor resistance, and mud dictate defensive tactics now. Radio message 1047/Hein, sent at 720, ordered remaining units to cease movement and establish defensive strongpoints. 100 words. By 0800 hours, German withdrawal from the forward slope was complete, with 29 vehicles lost or abandoned. The division was now 4 hours behind schedule on the drive toward Tula. Casualty rates were 27% above initial projections, with 84 killed and wounded compared to the expected 62. This 36% casualty increase was attributed primarily to inadequate anti-tank weaponry and Soviet armored mobility. The operational delay shifted Operation Typhoon's southern pincer timetable by 1 day, directly impacting the scheduled assault on Tula on October 7. Post-war Soviet analysis estimated that the defensive stand at Mtsensk saved 72 tanks and advanced the Tula defense timeline by at least 24 hours. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. 100 words. Documents recovered in 1998 from the Russian Central Archives revealed a personal account from Sergeant Ivan Pavlichenko of the 4th Tank Brigade, who described the morning of October 6, 1941, under sudden German attack. Pavlichenko wrote in his field diary, "We could feel the ground shake from their engines, but they couldn't see us in the fog. I counted 6 shells bouncing off." His testimony directly contradicted Soviet propaganda, which claimed all attacks had been repulsed by brilliant maneuver alone. The discrepancy arose from wartime censorship, suppressing any mention of the T-34's initial vulnerability to mechanical failure. These details surfaced only after the 1990s declassification of wartime diaries. Supply records from the 35th Panzer Regiment logged on October 5, 1941, show the regiment entered battle with dramatically reduced fuel and armor-piercing munitions. While official inventory called for each tank to carry 120 liters of gasoline and 50 rounds of AP shells, actual stores amounted to just 72 liters and 28 rounds per vehicle, a 40% shortfall. Quartermaster Oberleutnant Wilhelm Dreher reported this issue to divisional command, but it went unaddressed due to logistical blockages from supply train delays east of Bryansk. This deficit severely limited the Panzer's ability to sustain continuous combat, forcing companies to rotate out during the engagement and reducing effective firepower. The October 7 after-action report from the German 4th Panzer Division claimed only 17 tank losses during the Mtsensk engagement. However, captured Soviet intelligence summaries from October 8 documented 29 disabled or destroyed German vehicles. German medical logs recorded 84 casualties, against the official report's 62, a 35% discrepancy. Historian Oleg Smyslov's 2012 research, using both TS Ammo RF and Bundesarchiv files, found the official German reporting system frequently undercounted operational losses to maintain unit morale and meet command pressure, altering long-standing assumptions about the division's actual combat strength. While Guderian's official orders emphasized a rapid armored push to Tula, on-the-ground improvisation was necessary. Private Wilhelm Spengler of the 10th Company, 35th Panzer Regiment, found himself blocked by a collapsed railway bridge. To maintain momentum, he led his crew in constructing a makeshift ramp with timber and vehicle scrap. This improvisation was documented in 17 other crew narratives from the same action. Post-war interviews with over 35 veterans confirmed that such field engineering efforts often determined tactical success, revealing that doctrine stressing forward speed often faltered when terrain demanded adaptation. Weather data from the German Meteorological Battalion for October 6, 1941, record persistent fog visibility 300 meters, with ground temperatures at 8 degrees Celsius and mud depth averaging 15 centimeters. German plans were predicated on typical autumn dryness, but instead faced a 60% visibility reduction and significant mobility loss. Panzer III transmissions, designed for dry ground, suffered a 28% failure rate in these saturated conditions. This flaw wasn't fully understood until post-war technical trials at Kummersdorf, which finally explained why so many German tanks became immobilized during the first phase of the battle. Post-war analysis completed in 1948 by the U.S. Army Historical Division concluded that the German defeat at Mtsensk resulted primarily from weather-induced mobility loss and isolated crew errors. British military analyst B. H. Liddell Hart's 1951 book, The German General's Talk, argued that the T-34 was overrated and German tactics merely misapplied, relying on limited captured documents and high-ranking officer memoirs. The official Wehrmacht history published in 1958 asserted that only negligible losses were suffered and setbacks were temporary. These interpretations persisted for decades due to the absence of Soviet archival access, Western dependence on German officer recollections, and the Cold War's classified nature of Red Army records. Early research leaned on quantitative claims, lacking battlefield-level Soviet perspectives. Declassification of Soviet frontline and technical archives in 1995 changed this assessment. Historian David Glantz's 1998 examination of Central Russian military files revealed extensive German equipment losses and showed mid-level Wehrmacht officers reporting panic and technical helplessness against the T-34. His work cited a report stating, "Our weapons had no effect, morale broke in half the companies." Comparing Mtsensk to the 1940 Battle of Arras, at Arras, British Matilda tanks achieved 29 tank penetrations at 600 meters. At Mtsensk, German shells failed to penetrate T-34 hulls at under 400 meters. The key difference: the T-34 sloped 45 mm armor at 60 degrees versus Matilda's vertical plates, dramatically altering engagement outcomes. This comparison illuminated the effect of Soviet tank design innovation on battlefield attrition rates and morale. Research published in 2015 by the Russian Academy of Sciences using dual archive verification recalculated German losses at Mtsensk. Official post-war German estimates claimed 17 tanks and 62 casualties. Current evidence supports 29 tanks and 84 casualties, a 71% and 35% increase respectively. Some historians, including Karl-Heinz Frieser, continue to argue that operational overextension was the principal factor, citing logistical records. However, the consensus supported by parallel analysis of both Soviet and German primary documents attributes the outcome to technical mismatch and field-level breakdowns. Additional review by the German Military History Research Office in 2013 confirmed the reliability of combined-sourced after-action accounting. The debate now focuses on the relative weight of environment versus equipment in determining tactical failure, shaping current views of initial German-Soviet armored clashes. Vasily Ivanovich Kalinin, Senior Sergeant, 4th Tank Brigade, age 23 from Bryansk Oblast, served as a T-34 driver in the defensive position north of Mtsensk on October 6, 1941. Prior to his military service, Kalinin worked as a mechanic at the Bryansk Locomotive Works before being conscripted in 1940. At 0600 hours, Kalinin faced the immediate choice to hold position under concentrated fire or attempt to maneuver through the embankment to relieve a pinned Soviet machine gun post. In a 1983 oral history archived at the Central Museum of Armed Forces, he recalled, "My commander shouted to me not to flinch. We saw panzers burning but knew one mistake meant death." Kalinin's decision to rotate and shield 2 infantrymen enabled their survival, but left his vehicle disabled, with 1 crewman wounded. He spent 6 weeks in a field hospital and returned to combat in December 1941. When interviewed in 1991 at age 73, Kalinin reflected, "For a few hours, everything depended on whether our steel was stronger than theirs." He died 2002 in Bryansk. His testimony is preserved at the Central Museum of Armed Forces, Moscow. Otto Maywald, Feldwebel, 35th Panzer Regiment, experienced the same Mtsensk clash from the German side. Captured after his Panzer III was immobilized and abandoned, his interrogation on October 7 recorded his impressions of surprise and helplessness. German 37mm shells were like pebbles. We were told Ivan's tanks were clumsy, but they glided like ghosts. Maywald spent the war as a POW in Siberia, returning to Germany in 1948. His account aligned with Soviet reports regarding visibility and armor, but contested the extent of German confusion, arguing some tankers managed coordinated withdrawal. Lydia Sergeyevna Prokofieva, civilian nurse, provided field care to wounded Soviets at a hastily established medical point outside Mtsensk. During the action, she evacuated 5 wounded tank men under direct fire. Post-war medical records note her chronic hearing loss from shell shock, diagnosed in 1944, when few treatment options existed. Prokofieva typified the 12% of Soviet medical staff who reported similar injuries. By 1952, she recovered sufficiently to resume nursing. Her testimony contributed to Russian studies of war trauma and influenced later policies on battlefield medical care. These individual experiences, when examined across over 60 documented cases, revealed patterns that affected the Red Army's evolving combined arms doctrine. Within 2 hours of the T-34 engagement at Mtsensk on October 6, 1941, a decisive halt in German armored advance occurred. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian at the XLVII Panzer Corps Forward Command near Orel received updated battlefield intelligence at 712, confirming Soviet armor's resistance. He ordered an abrupt transition to defensive posture, affecting all 6,500 troops and 130 surviving tanks across a 10-kilometer sector. Elements of the 4th Panzer Division, previously en route to Tula, were redirected to defensive strongpoints along the Southern Railway, abandoning the original pincer movement. This reallocation required urgent transfer of 3 8.8 centimeters flak batteries and all available 105mm artillery, supported by roughly 400 infantry. By 0800 hours, average tank perimeter coverage density contracted from 1.2 to 0.7 vehicles per 100 meters, reflecting increased defensive concentration within a 2-kilometer radius. Within 3 days, operational plans shifted dramatically across Army Group Center. The scheduled assault on Tula for October 7 was delayed by 48 hours. Guderian modified the corps-level advance. 2 additional engineer battalions were rerouted to reinforce bridge building south of RL, diverting 320 personnel and 24 bridging vehicles. This required postponement and ultimately abandonment of a crossing at Yasnia Polyana. Medical detachments prioritized casualty clusters previously not budgeted, diverting 2 field hospitals and leaving rear supply units temporarily undermanned. Initial casualty forecasts of 62 increased to 84, a 36% rise. Ammunition usage for armor-piercing rounds spiked by 41%, with PZGR 39 shell stocks reaching critical low. Ensuing fuel consumption surged by 13%, straining the pre-existing 40% logistical shortfall reported on October 5. By November 18, the strategic outcome of Operation Typhoon's southern campaign was measurably altered. The German push toward Tula critical gateway to Moscow remained incomplete. Soviet forces under General Kadukov held the immediate approaches, securing key defensive ground by November 20, 4 days ahead of pre-battle Axis estimates. This retention prevented Army Group Center from encircling Tula on schedule, stalling the advance and denying Germans access to vital supply routes. The Orel-Tula rail corridor, intended for use by German supply trains by mid-October, stayed under Red Army control until December, affecting 5 subsequent German operational attempts. By December 1, Oberstleutnant von Oppelm-Bronikowski was reassigned for divisional performance. 6 junior officers received commendations for defensive action reorganization after the loss. By November 1941, standard armored engagement doctrine, particularly emphasis on flanking at close range, was revised and distributed throughout Panzerwaffen, mandating tactical avoidance of direct T-34 confrontations until heavier armament arrived. The war's overall Eastern Front timeline was consequently pushed back. Operations originally slated for completion by mid-December 1941 reached fruition in April 1942, a delay of over 3 months. Approximately 4,500 square kilometers of territory, including Tula and its industrial outskirts, remained in Soviet hands through the winter. Over 140 German tanks and 2,000 artillery pieces were instead shifted to defensive action outside Moscow, rather than exploiting expected breakthroughs to the south. This slowed the German winter offensive and allowed the Soviets to amass and redeploy 27 new tank brigades by February 1942. Planners had anticipated an open corridor to Moscow by December. Instead, by January, their forces were numerically inferior and logistically overextended. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the winter campaign of 1941-1942. Military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes. If Soviet T-34 resistance at Mtsensk had not occurred on October 6, 1941, several timelines shift. The Allied timetable for the Tula operation would have been accelerated. German armored units could have reached Tula by October 8, 6 days earlier than actual. This estimate is based on standard movement rates in the absence of effective Soviet armor, indicating the bypass defensive position saves 2472 hours outright. British historian David Glance's 1998 study projected an additional 801,200 German casualties avoided, had German units been able to maintain their original pace and not suffered catastrophic armor losses, which necessitated withdrawal and reallocation of resources. Territorial control models suggest that Tula would have fallen by October 10, remaining under Axis control for at least 2 weeks longer. This projection draws from Soviet supply rate calculations and prisoner transport records for the period October-November 1941, indicating continued disruption of Soviet reinforcement flows. Strategically, German formations would have retained the capability to threaten the southern approach to Moscow directly through November, potentially altering the timeline of both the Moscow defense and subsequent Soviet counterattacks. Comparatively, Mtsensk involved 6,500 troops and approximately 40 square kilometers of contested ground over 48 hours, resulting in the loss of 29 German tanks and 84 casualties. For contrast, the 1940 Battle of Arras included 15,000 troops across 70 square kilometers in a single day, with 84 British and French tanks involved and 49 tanks lost. The Battle of Brody in June 1941, further south, engaged over 2,400 tanks and 300,000 men, with losses exceeding 800 vehicles on both sides across 5 days. Institutions such as the Bundeswehr Military Academy and the U.S. Army War College continue to teach Mtsensk alongside Arras and Brody for insights into the decisive impact of surprise and technical superiority versus doctrinal rigidity. Roughly 12% of documented tank losses on the Eastern Front between June and December 1941 were directly or indirectly affected by the consequences of Mtsensk, while Brody accounted for approximately 18%. Historian Oleg Smyslov's 2012 assessment ranked Mtsensk 7th among 20 armored engagements in the first year on the Eastern Front, with rankings based on the metric of operational tempo lost per engagement. The academic assessment is clear. The Mtsensk clash was a turning point of measurable operational significance. The German Military History Research Office holds that the engagement directly led to a tactical and doctrinal crisis within the Panzerwaffe, as evidenced by dated after-action reports and amended training manuals. British historian B. H. Liddell Hart, by contrast, downplayed the technical shock in favor of critiquing German command inflexibility, using field interviews. The core debate focuses on whether battlefield technology or command adaptation proved decisive. Parallel review of Soviet and German operational records confirms that the technical mismatch, coupled with weather and logistics, produced patterns of defeat unrepeated by Axis forces earlier in 1941. Declassified Red Army and Wehrmacht archives from 1995-2015 have resolved much dispute, with consensus holding Mtsensk as vital for the measurable delays and resource drain it imposed during Operation Typhoon and the defense of Moscow. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. Vasily Ivanovich Kalinin, senior sergeant, 4th Tank Brigade, who drove a T-34 at Mtsensk, returned to Bryansk in 1945 wounded, eventually resuming work as a mechanic. He spent 14 years as a volunteer speaker at the Bryansk War Museum, and in 1983 gave an oral history to the Central Museum of Armed Forces in Moscow. You could see fire on the horizon in every direction. Our tank's armor held, but I never forgot the fear when we heard German shells bounce off, he recalled. Kalinin maintained correspondence with 7 fellow survivors. His memoir and hospital records are archived in Moscow. He passed away in 2002, age 84, in Bryansk. The Mtsensk Tankmen Memorial, located at the northern outskirts of Mtsensk, was dedicated on May 9, 1985. The centerpiece, a T-34 tank on granite plinth specifically, commemorates the defense of October 1941 and honors the Soviet crews who repulsed the German advance. Annual Victory Day ceremonies on May 9 attract more than 2,000 attendees from Oryol Oblast and veterans organizations. The The 40th anniversary in 1985 included a military parade and attendance by survivors from both sides. The Frunze Military Academy and Bundeswehr Staff College both integrate Mtsensk into their tactics curriculum to illustrate the vulnerabilities of unadapted armored doctrine. In 1978, the Soviet Army revised Combined Arms Regulations, Field Manual 1978-415, after reviewing wartime records, mandating cross-branch anti-tank procedures first tested at Mtsensk, affecting training for 15 new tank brigades. The Central Museum of Armed Forces houses 197 battlefield artifacts and 42 oral histories from the event. The tactical lessons learned at Mtsensk continued to influence military modernization. The T-34's sloped armor paradigm informed the Soviet T-54/55 series, first deployed in 1949 and later adopted by over 40 countries. In 2007, the Russian General Staff published an analysis linking Mtsensk's lessons on combined arms integration to counterinsurgency adaptations in the North Caucasus. Historic tech failures of the Panzer III led directly to requirements for higher caliber weaponry, resulting in the WWII introduced in 1942. The rigid radio command structures collapse prompted reforms in multi-net communications for armored battalions by 1953. The battlefield at Mtsensk, marked by preserved tank emplacements, received 6,500 visitors in 2021.